Hello, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. I am, I'm really excited about today's topic, actually, because it's something that, well, it touches every single one of us who uses a phone, a computer, or, even just talks to a smart speaker. We're talking about this silent revolution that's happening literally every time we send a text or ask Siri a question.
Greetings, it's good to be here. And it really is a critical area. I mean, these tools, they're not just optional extras anymore, are they? They're becoming fundamental to how we live our modern lives.
Absolutely. So today we're doing a deep dive into how this technology is mediating our most basic interactions. We're talking about something called artificial intelligence mediated communication, or AIMC, and more importantly, why the incredible promise of these tools is maybe only being delivered to some of us.
That's the core of it. So our mission for you today is to really get into the weeds of a study, a really comprehensive one, published in the journal Computers and Human Behavior back in 2021. The source material, which we're just calling AIMC.pdf for our purposes, it used a mix of quantitative survey data and these really insightful open-ended qualitative comments.
And they talked to a lot of people for this. It was, 519 participants in the U.S. with a pretty big age range, too. I think it was 19 to 74.
A very broad range, yes. And the whole point of this paper, its entire focus is on this massive but, often invisible problem. It's the gap between the availability of these AI tools and their true accessibility to all users.
That distinction is so important. Let's really hammer that home right at the start. Availability is like everyone gets a map to a superhighway. It exists. It's out there for you to use.
Right.
But accessibility. Accessibility means that map works perfectly whether you're in a brand new self-driving car or, an older car that doesn't have GPS. Or maybe you can't even afford the gas to get on the highway in the first place.
That's an excellent parallel, because that's precisely the warning the researchers gave, right there in their abstract. They basically said that without very careful design and a real focus on equity, AIMC is at risk of systematically reproducing and even deepening the inequalities that already exist.
So the tech that's supposed to connect us all could actually end up driving us further apart.
That's the danger, especially when it comes to who can access and use these tools. So we really need to look closely at their numbers and at what people were actually saying to see where those barriers really are.
Okay, so let's start at square one. We need to define our terms. What exactly is AIMC? Because, you could argue that any piece of tech that helps us talk to each other is mediating our conversation, but this paper says this is a fundamental shift.
It is a fundamental shift, and that's right. If you think about the history of communication tech, the telegraph, the telephone, even the first email systems, they were essentially passive.
Passive conduits.
Exactly, passive conduits. They just took your message from point A and delivered it to point B. But now, with AI integrated into everything, the technology's role is shifting. It's going from being a passive tool to something. Well, the paper calls it more agentic.
Agentic, okay. So that means the software is acting, in a way, on its own, or at least it's operating with some kind of intelligence on your behalf, often without you having to tell it every single little thing to do.
Precisely. The study gives us a really solid definition for this. They define AIMC as interpersonal communication, where an intelligent agent operates on behalf of a communicator. And it does this by modifying, augmenting, or generating messages to accomplish communication goals. It's an active, intelligent intervention right in the middle in a human-to-human conversation.
And this is where it gets really mind-blowing for me. Because when most people hear AI, they jump straight to the big stuff. Generative models, complex chatbots, that kind of thing. Yeah. But this paper just forces you to realize that AIMC it's everywhere. And it's been a part of our daily lives for years.
Absolutely. I mean, yes, Amazon Alexa and Google Translate are very obvious examples, but the paper brings up things we completely overlook because they're so seamless, so integrated, like the little suggestion boxes in Gmail Smart Reply.
Oh, yeah, the quick replies.
The quick replies. And maybe the most surprising one, the intelligent systems behind Microsoft Word's spell check and grammar check.
Okay, wait. Let's pause on that for a second. Spell check. How on earth do they justify calling a basic autocorrect an intelligent agent? That seems like a big stretch of the word intelligence.
It seems like it at first, but it fits the definition perfectly. The agent is modifying or augmenting your message to achieve a goal. And in this case, the goal is clarity or grammatical correctness. Modern spell checkers don't just compare your word to a static list in a dictionary anymore.
Right, they do more now.
They do so much more. They analyze the context of your sentence. They suggest stylistic improvements. Some of them even learn from your own writing patterns over time. It is an active intervention designed specifically to improve the communication outcome. So if we accept that even basic spell check is an AIMC tool, well, it just changes the whole scale of what we're talking about.
I'm with you, yeah. That realization alone makes this whole conversation so much more urgent. So, to help break down this huge, omnipresent landscape, the researchers came up with a really clear framework. They sorted all these AIMC tools into 6 different functional types. It makes it so clear that AIMC is definitely, as they say, not a monolith.
Exactly. The function of the tool is the key to understanding why some people use it and some people don't. We can break them down into those 6 types, which they lay out in Table 1 of the study.
Okay, let's walk through them just so we're all on the same page. Where should we start? The most recognized ones.
Yeah, let's start there. First, we have what they call a voice-assisted communication. These are the tools that respond to your verbal commands to, generate, send, or even read messages back to you. The examples are the big ones. Apple Siri, Google Assistant.
And the hardware too, right? Like Amazon Alexa or Google Home.
And the hardware, exactly. The defining feature here is the voice command input. It's all about speaking to the machine.
Right. The things in our phones and on our counters that are pretty much always listening for our requests.
Yeah, got it. What's number 2?
Second is language correction. And this is the category that includes our old friend, spell check. These tools find errors in written text spelling, grammar, style, and then they either just fix it for you, like Apple's iMessage autocorrection.
The dreaded autocorrect.
The dreaded autocorrect, yes. Or they suggest corrections that you can accept or reject. Think of tools like Grammarly or the proofreading features built right into Microsoft Word. Okay, so this is the invisible layer that's constantly, polishing our writing before anyone else ever gets to see it. What's the next most common one? Something about prediction.
That would be the third category, yes. Predictive text suggestion. These agents are basically trying to guess what you want to say. They anticipate your communication and suggest outputs. It could be as simple as the next word on your phone's keyboard, or it could be entire phrases or even emojis.
Well, like the Gmail Smart Reply, where you get those 3 little boxes at the bottom of an email with canned responses.
Exactly that. Or Gmail Smart Compose, which tries to finish your whole sentence for you as you're typing.
We've all had that moment where Gmail suggests a reply that's technically correct, but the tone is just completely wrong. That's the AI acting on your behalf. And, well, sometimes it helps and sometimes it just creates an awkward situation.
It really does. So those first 3 are very focused on creating and refining the message itself. The next 2 are more about changing the format of the message. So that brings us to the 4th and 5th types. They deal with changing the modality or the language. Number 4 is transcription tools. These convert messages from one sensory mode to another. So speech to text, like drag-in dictation.
Or even the dictation button on your phone's keyboard.
Right. Or the other way, text to speech, like natural reader. And it also includes those tools that turn audio from a meeting into a text document, like otter.ai.
Okay, so transcription is about the format. Speech to text, audio to text, and then translation is specifically about the meaning changing across languages.
Exactly. 5th is translation tools. Pretty self-explanatory. They convert messages from one language to another. This can happen in the same format, text to text with Google Translate, or it can happen across formats, like live speech translation, where you talk into your phone and it speaks another language out loud.
And then the 6th and final type it's a bit different. It's more about long-term improvement.
That's right. The last one is personalized language learning. Think of apps like Duolingo, Rosetta Stone, or Memrise. Their function is really unique in this list. They're designed to help you get better at a language you don't speak fluently, and they do it by personalizing the lessons based on how you're doing.
Okay, so we've got our 6 categories: voice, correction, prediction, transcription, translation, and learning. Now that we understand the landscape, let's get to the really critical question. Which of these tools are people actually using? And what does that pattern tell us about who has access?
And that is where the numbers first begin to expose the real depth of this accessibility gap.
Right. Let's move into that second section of the analysis then, the overall adoption patterns. Looking at the numbers from those 519 participants, the first thing that jumps out is that overall adoption seems incredibly high. It looks like everyone is using this stuff.
It really does. I mean, the study found that all but 5 of the people they talked to, which works out to a pretty staggering 99.04%, reported using at least one type of AI-MC.
99%.
It just reinforces what we said at the start. This technology is everywhere. It's totally omnipresent in our communication world.
And this is the big but, when you take that almost universal usage and you break it down by those 6 different functions, the story completely changes. The benefits are clearly not spread out evenly. They're all clustered around a few very specific, highly integrated tools.
That's right. The quantitative findings in Table 2 of the paper show this really stark contrast between, let's call them the winners and the laggards. The 2 most widely adopted categories just completely dominate the field. They're at new saturation levels.
The clear winners being, number 1, voice-assisted communication, with 91.94% adoption. And right there with it, language correction, which is basically tied at 91.78%. So almost 9 out of every 10 people surveyed are using those first 2 categories routinely.
They're just so deeply embedded in our devices. A lot of these tools are passive, Yeah. They don't require an active choice from the user. You buy a new smartphone, it comes with Siri or Google Assistant, it comes with autocorrect. That baked-in nature is what drives that adoption rate sky high.
Okay, now let's compare that to the other end of the spectrum. The least adopted tool, according to the study, was transcription at just 41.30%.
Right.
And personalized language learning wasn't much better at 57.17%.
That is a massive disparity. You go from over 90% adoption for the top 2 down to just 41% for the one at the bottom. That gap, a full 50 percentage points, is the clearest first-glance indicator that the benefits of AI-MC are absolutely not being distributed equally.
So let's try to figure out why. Let's look at the top performers first. Why is voice-assisted communication number 1? You mentioned that it's built in, but the paper adds another really crucial layer to that explanation in section 7.1.
It does. While both voice assistants and language correction get this huge boost from being pre-installed on devices, the paper argues that voice assistants in particular succeed for another reason. They're so successful because they can do things that go way beyond just mediating communication.
So they're not just communication tools, they're general utility tools.
Exactly. I don't just ask Alexa to send a text message. I ask her to set a timer for my pasta, or turn on the lights, or play a specific song, or tell me the weather. Their utility is just so broad, it crosses so many different parts of your daily life. The paper even cites some other research where they tracked over 193,000 commands given to Alexa in one study. It just shows that communication is only one tiny slice of what these devices do.
And because they do so much, and they're always just there, waiting for a command, people adopt them at a huge rate.
That's a powerful point. The tools that are winning aren't necessarily the ones that are best at helping us communicate. They're the ones that do the most stuff and are just part of the hardware, so the barrier to entry is basically 0. Now, let's flip that. Let's look at the other end, transcription tools. Converting speech to text, only 41% adoption. Why do you think that specific category lags so far behind something like language correction, which almost everyone uses?
Well, my gut says it comes down to a couple of things that require a lot more from the user and from the tech. First, accuracy. Transcription has to be incredibly accurate to be useful. The stakes are just so much higher. If my spell check gets one word wrong in a text, it's usually funny or obvious. But if an AI incorrectly transcribes a doctor's note or a legal deposition, the consequences could be really severe.
That's a great point. The fidelity has to be near perfect.
And second, I think the use case is just less frequent for most people. I mean, we all write texts and emails constantly, all day long. But how often do you need a full, accurate word-for-word transcription of something? It's usually for specific contexts, like meetings or lectures or interviews, not an everyday need for the average person.
That is precisely the analysis that data points toward. Transcription requires a much higher level of input accuracy and output precision to be truly useful. If the AI doesn't understand your voice perfectly, the result is basically useless. Unlike spell check, which can still be helpful even if you're a sloppy typer, this reliance on high fidelity is probably a huge factor.
And what about personalized language learning? I mean, Duolingo is a huge brand, everyone knows about it, but still only 57% adoption. That seems to suggest that even if a tool is really visible, the active commitment required to learn something is a huge barrier in itself, especially compared to the passivity of autocorrect just fixing your typos for you.
A critical observation, yes. These lower adoption rates show us that even if the tech is readily available in your app store, there are inherent design limitations or utility requirements or even just the cognitive load needed to use the tools successfully that are creating these massive hurdles. And this unequal distribution is the perfect entry point to our next section, analyzing the three underlying causes of this accessibility problem. We can move beyond just the usage numbers now and into the societal and technological barriers.
Okay, let's do it. Let's dig into what the study identified as those three major categories of barriers. This is where the numbers really start to tell a much deeper sociological story. And we're starting with the most fundamental one, technological access.
Right. So the researchers went into this with a pretty straightforward prediction. They called it Hypothesis 1. And it basically said that having better access to devices, which they measured by counting how many internet accessing devices a person had, would be positively correlated with adopting all 6 types of AIMC. It seems obvious, right? More devices, more chances to use the tools.
Makes sense. But the result was, well, it was really surprising in how specific it was.
It was. That hypothesis was only supported for one of the 6 categories.
This one?
Voice-assisted communication tools. It didn't hold true for any of the other 5.
Okay, that's really counterintuitive. Why only voice assistants? Why would having more devices only help you adopt that one specific type of tool?
Well, for voice-assisted communication, the finding was incredibly strong. The number of devices a person owned was significantly related to whether they used a voice assistant. The statistics showed a very clear connection. For every additional device you own, your likelihood of using something like Alexa or Siri jumps up noticeably.
So why the specific link?
The explanation, which the study suggests and we've kind of touched on, is rooted in the very nature of tools like Amazon Alexa and Google Home. They are critically reliant on 2 things: specific hardware, the smart speaker itself, and a constant, stable, high-speed internet connection to work. If you don't have that smart speaker, or if your Wi-Fi is spotty, you literally cannot use the tool. It's a hard barrier.
Ah, I see. Whereas something like basic spell check or the predictive keyboard on your phone, that's probably baked into an older operating system, right? It doesn't need the latest hardware or constant internet connection to function.
Yeah.
So the number of new devices you have is a specific bottleneck for the most popular, most advanced tools, but it's less of a barrier for the tools that are already everywhere.
Exactly. It shows that even the most popular tools, despite their high adoption rate, are creating their own unique kind of barrier that's based on hardware. And the qualitative feedback from people in the study really brought this to life.
How so? What were people saying in their comments?
They were talking about the cycle of tech becoming obsolete. It was a major concern. Participants explicitly mentioned their current devices getting old and becoming incompatible with the newer AI-MC tools, which basically forces them into buying expensive new hardware just to keep up.
That cycle of obsolescence hits so much harder when it's about communication. That's not optional. If you can't run the new software, you're cut off from the most efficient ways to talk to people.
And that was made even worse by what they called network frustrations. So many people reported not having access to affordable, stable, or consistent internet, which, as we said, is a non-negotiable requirement for most of these tools to work well. This isn't just a tech problem. It points right to the socioeconomic factors that control who gets good internet and who doesn't.
And speaking of socioeconomic factors, that brings us right to the second major barrier the study found: demographic factors.
Yeah.
We know the study was broad, with people from 19 all the way to 74.
And those demographic variables had a really broad and systemic impact. The single most robust finding across the entire study was the inverse relationship between age and adoption.
So, to put it simply, the older you are, the less likely you are to use any of these AIMC tools. Full stop.
That was the general pattern across all 6 functional categories. The correlation scores showed a significant negative relationship pretty much across the board. This tells us that age, no matter which tool we're talking about, is acting as a systematic brake on adoption. It's a vital finding because it confirms that the benefits of this AI revolution in communication are systematically skewing toward younger people.
But it gets way more complicated when you drill down into specific tool types,
Yeah.
right? I'm thinking of the translation tools. The data there showed a really curious pairing of factors.
It really did. It was fascinating. The deeper analysis showed 2 specific, statistically significant things linked to adopting translation tools. First was a positive link with higher levels of education. Second was a positive link with lower annual family income.
Okay, that's the part we have to unpack. Higher education and lower income, both leading to more use of translation tools. That seems contradictory. What kind of real-world situations could possibly explain that?
Well, the paper admits this needs more research, but we can definitely speculate based on the context. On one side, you have the higher education group. This could be people in, say, international academia or global business or scientific research, where they absolutely have to communicate across languages for their work. Their salary might not be huge, but their need is high, and they have the skills to find and use complex tools.
Okay, that makes sense. A need based on profession or field of study. And then the lower income connection. That sounds like it's driven by immediate daily necessity.
Precisely. The lower income demographic often includes a high number of recent immigrants or essential workers in service industries or people living in multilingual families and communities. For them, a translation tool isn't a neat gadget for a vacation, it's a lifeline. It's a necessary utility for navigating government services, understanding a lease, or just communicating at their job. That necessity-driven use likely overrides some of the other barriers that might normally stop them from adopting a new technology.
That's a really powerful example of how need can completely change the adoption landscape. It makes it so clear that you can't just look at one factor, like income, and predict behavior. You have to look at the function of the tool.
And that transitions us perfectly into the third major barrier. This one is about the internal factors, the user's own cognitive and psychological state when they encounter the technology. The study calls this AI-MC literacy.
And this might be the most powerful finding of all, because it's about things like confidence and comfort. And those are things we can actually change, unlike someone's age or income.
Exactly. So AI-MC literacy, as they define it, has a few parts. There's familiarity, which is basically how well you understand how the tool works. And then there's comfort and confidence, which are about your skill and your belief that you can actually use the tool successfully.
So of all those components of literacy, which one turned out to be the most important for getting people to actually use these tools?
Hands down, it was comfort. Increased feelings of comfort had a significant positive correlation with the adoption of all 6 tool types across every single variable they measured: demographics, literacy, everything. Comfort was the single strongest predictor of adoption.
Wow.
If you feel comfortable using it, you are way more likely to adopt it and keep using it. It doesn't matter if it's a smart speaker or a language app, comfort is the universal key.
Comfort is the key. It speaks to intuitive design, ease of use, and just that emotional feeling of safety when you're interacting with the AI. But what about the other part? Understanding, or as they call it, familiarity. That seemed to be much more specific.
That is the critical distinction. Familiarity, really understanding the nuts and bolts, was only positively connected to adopting 2 specific types of tools: translation and personalized language learning.
Okay, let's dive into that. Why is that? Why do I need to understand how Duolingo works more than I need to understand how my spell check works?
It comes down to the stakes. For a tool like language correction spell check, the goal is usually speed and fixing minor errors. You generally trust the system not to, fundamentally change the meaning of your sentence when it corrects a typo.
But when you're communicating across languages, with translation or learning, the risk of a major error is much, much higher.
Precisely. The paper suggests that for any communication that crosses a language barrier, where meaning can be incredibly nuanced, a higher level of user understanding familiarity is crucial. That familiarity lets you double-check the AI's work. It lets you understand its limits and step in if the suggestion is missing some cultural context or has the completely wrong tone. You need to trust the system, but you also need to know enough to be able to verify what that intelligent agent is saying for you.
So comfort is what lets you pick up the tool in the first place. It's the intuitive interface. But familiarity is knowing the engine's limitations. And that becomes essential when a mistake could create a huge misunderstanding across a language barrier.
And that synthesis really highlights how multifaceted this accessibility problem is. It's not just about giving people a device. It's about making them feel psychologically safe and knowledgeable enough to actually trust the AI with their communication.
Okay, we've gone deep into the quantitative side of this, the what and the who. Now let's turn to section 4 in this study and get into the qualitative results. This is where the actual voices of those 519 people add so much color and, frankly, some pretty serious critiques of how AI is being designed today.
The qualitative data was so compelling. It provided really strong support for these barriers we've been talking about, and it especially highlighted who is being systematically left behind by current tech design.
Let's start with what seems like one of the most serious examples of implicit bias they identified, the voice barrier. This connects right back to the tools we were just discussing, the super popular voice-assisted communication and the not-so-popular transcription tools.
The fundamental technical issue here is that current voice recognition technology, which is the engine for both of those tool types, consistently struggles. It has a hard time accurately recognizing different accents, different tones of voice, speech impediments, all sorts of speech characteristics.
And this is so much more than just a minor bug. If the AI literally cannot process your specific way of speaking, you are completely and systematically excluded from using the single most adopted category of AI-MC. What do the user anecdotes say about this experience?
They revealed a lot of frustration and a real feeling of exclusion. The researchers highlighted a comment from one man, a white bilingual man who spoke English and Japanese fluently, and he specifically voiced his concern about inaccuracies and misunderstandings in the case of text transcription or translation, and his inability to use speech recognition due to having an accent.
So he's essentially denied access to the tool, not because he can't afford it or doesn't understand it, but because the underlying AI model just wasn't trained on a voice like his.
Exactly. And there was another comment from a Latino participant who said very emphatically that these speech tools needed to be improved so they were able to understand different accents better. I mean, people brought it up again and again. They talked about the need for AI to detect inflections, volumes, different accent styles and disabilities, and just other variations in speech.
This is so crucial because it points to an inherent implicit bias that's built right into the AI models themselves. These models are often trained on massive data sets that are overwhelmingly standard, majority English dialects. The design literally reflects the dominant culture.
And the implication of that is clear and pretty damning. It means that non-native English speakers or English speakers with what are considered minoritized dialects or
Yeah.
individuals with certain speech abilities, they all face these huge structural hurdles when they try to use tools that depend on speech recognition. The design itself is marginalizing them. It's preventing them from accessing a tool that 92% of the population is using.
That's the paradox, isn't it? If 9 out of 10 people are using voice assistants, but the AI is biased against regional accents or non-native speakers, doesn't that make this one of the single biggest structural barriers in modern communication today? The more successful the tool becomes, the greater the exclusion for some groups.
That is the paradox we're facing.
Yeah.
Yes, high adoption rates can actually mask systemic failures for minority users. And this leads us perfectly into the next major qualitative theme, which connects right back to our literacy findings. It's about the barriers of understanding and visibility. We established that comfort is key. But what's stopping some users from ever even getting to that point of feeling comfortable?
It's because they never gain the confidence to use the tool successfully in the first place.
Right.
They don't get it.
Exactly. Many participants said flat out that they found certain AIMC tools difficult to understand, which directly led to that critical lack of confidence. There was one black man in his 30s who had a positive view, saying he was usually able to figure out how to use these tools successfully once understood. But for so many others, that initial moment of understanding was an insurmountable wall.
And the data suggests this visibility problem is especially bad for older participants, which reinforces that inverse relationship between age and adoption we saw in the numbers.
It is a critical finding on age and marketing. The study captured these anecdotes showing that older users feel like they're just not the target audience. They feel like the industry isn't talking to them, so they're often completely unaware that these tools are even available. A white woman in her 50s commented, and I'm quoting here, "I think I lack some experience in technologies simply because I don't know they are available."
Wow. So it's not just that older people are resistant to technology, which is the stereotype. It's a failure of the tech industry to market and present these tools in a way that includes everyone. If you're not seen as the target market, you're not given the chance to develop that all-important sense of comfort.
Precisely. Older participants in the study specifically connected this lack of visibility,
Hmm.
this feeling of not being marketed to, with a lack of opportunities to build up their technological confidence. If you don't know a tool exists, or you don't see ads or tutorials showing people who look like you using it successfully, you never even start down that road to adoption. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of technological marginalization.
And finally, there's the emotional and trust factor. That has to impact comfort and, by extension, adoption.
That is the final psychological layer,
Yeah.
yes. While some users did report positive feelings towards these tools, seeing them unhelpful, a significant number of others cited major concerns, specifically about privacy and implicit bias. And this lines up perfectly with other research on how people perceive AI in general, like with social media algorithms.
Of course. If you believe the AI agent might be biased in the suggestions it's giving you, or if you think it's constantly listening to your private conversations without proper safeguards, that's going to immediately destroy any feeling of comfort.
Distrust is a profound barrier. Whether it's based on news stories about data breaches or just a gut feeling that the output is unfair, it undermines comfort, and as a result, it undermines adoption. The feedback suggests that designers can't just prove a tool is useful, they also have to earn the user's emotional trust.
Okay, let's try to synthesize all of these barriers one last time, because this is really the core takeaway from this study for you, the listener. We've gone from this simple realization that spell check is an AI agent, all the way to understanding the huge systemic consequences of who gets to access it.
The study's central finding is undeniable. AIMC is neither equally accessible nor equally impactful for everyone. We are seeing these persistent, interconnected barriers that are creating a systematic disadvantage based on a person's technology, their demographics, and their own psychology.
So we have the access barriers, the practical, real-world limits of having the right devices and affording stable internet. And that disproportionately impacts the most advanced tools like voice assistants that need that constant connection.
Then we have the demographic factors. Most importantly, that stark inverse relationship between age and adoption across the board, and that really nuanced, fascinating link for translation tools where sheer necessity is driving use among both highly educated and lower-income groups.
And finally, the literacy barriers, where comfort and understanding are the absolute gatekeepers to adoption. If you feel comfortable, you'll use it. And if you need it for a high-stakes task like translation, you also need that deeper familiarity to make sure the AI isn't misrepresenting you.
And all of this leads to the central risk, the main warning from the paper. If these accessibility concerns, everything from voice recognition being biased against accents to marketing that makes older users feel invisible, if these aren't addressed by the tech industry, then these tools are not going to be the great equalizer we hope for. Instead, they will just perpetuate and deepen the disadvantage for groups that have always been marginalized by one-size-fits-all technology.
This deep dive has completely changed how I think about something as simple as using Siri. It really shifts the whole perspective. It's not just a technical convenience anymore. It's a systemic issue of access. The availability is there for almost everyone, but the accessibility is deeply, deeply flawed.
That is the exact insight the researchers wanted us to walk away with. The study ends with this powerful, necessary call to action for the digital technology industry. You have to design with equity in mind from the very beginning. AI is here, it's mediating our lives, and it has to serve everyone.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Given that we now know that comfort is the absolute key to adoption, and that older users are being systematically left out of the marketing and visibility they need to develop that comfort, are we, as a society, passively accepting a future where older generations are just stuck communicating with older technology? Are we cementing a permanent digital divide across generations?
A very salient point on the ethical responsibilities of design. It really highlights that profound power shift that happens every single time we let an intelligent agent speak for us.
This has been absolutely illuminating, a really critical conversation to have.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting this rigorous discussion.
All right, I think that's all the time we have. I'm going to take off now.
Goodbye.
Talk to you later.